Hi you guys, it's been a while since I've made one of these videos for Chess Bootcamp, and you can see that I'm sporting my lockdown beard. I've pledged not to trim it or shave it until this coronavirus crisis has passed and we're all allowed back out again. So I've got a nice little game to share with you today. It's a good day for me because I've just broken my rapid rating record. I'm now up to 1473, which has been great. I'm finding that the way I'm doing that is by wake up in the morning, I'll go make my coffee, go back to bed with the iPad, and I'll give myself time to play maybe one or two 30-minute rapid games, and that's it. So there's a huge difference here. If you've got 1 hour per day to play your chess, set out to play one 30-minute game. That's 30 minutes each way, maximum 1 hour, and take your time and say to yourself, I'm setting out here to win, right? If my life depended on it, how could I win this game, right? How long do I need to take to find what I think is the single best move on the board? Okay, whatever you're playing, if you aren't playing what you think is the best move on the board, then how are you going to be improving? You're not really exerting yourself, right? You're not really playing at the edge of your ability. So, like I keep saying, Chess Bootcamp, take your time, take your time, take your time. Give yourself enough time. So play the time formats that will allow you to take the time that you need wherever you are in your chess journey to analyze all the options that you are aware of and to choose with good reason which is the best move. Okay, so I think that's why I am progressing higher in rapid. I've actually struggled more in blitz. My blitz rating's gone down towards 1300. And I've struggled to get it back up towards 1400 recently, but for some reason my rapid rating is climbing higher, and I'm certainly playing better chess at longer time formats. So that's the rule: play the time formats that give you enough time to find what you think is the best move on the board. Okay, so today I've got an exciting little game for you. I decided that I would go back to playing the London system as white. I have been playing a lot of Danish Gambit recently, but that's when I was trying to get my blitz rating back up towards my rapid rating. Danish Gambit is great fun, but it's not the most solid of openings for sure. So I really don't think that it's what I need to be playing for rapid if I'm really trying to improve and break through 1500. So here's the game I played today. My opponent is Tokuda12 from India, I believe. Yep. And is currently rated 1420. I'm rated a bit higher. And let's start with d4, standard London system opening. Knight to f6 is a very, very typical response to d4. And bishop to f4 is standard. c5 very often comes in the London system. Now obviously what black is doing here is threatening to take my pawn on d4 with a wing pawn, and that would mean that I end up with only one pawn in the two central columns and black ends up with three. So I don't want to allow that. So another thing that I'm trying to think about doing, particularly in the openings, and I'm tending to slow down a bit on the openings right now. There's really no point rattling out an opening in a 30-minute time format, at least. If you're playing bullet, then that's the way it goes. But if you're playing a longer time format, take the time over the opening, because I really am realizing how much the choice of moves in the openings really affects and cascades onto the rest of the game. So it's a perfectly rational move. And another thing I'm trying to do right now is to think about, for each of these moves that I play, particularly early on in the game, I want to be achieving more than one thing if I can with a move. So is it developing a piece? Am I protecting something? Am I putting a piece in a protected square and stuff like that. So right now, what are my options? Yes, the pawn is protected by the queen, but I still don't want that to happen. So I'm thinking c2 to c3 defends the pawn on d4 and also gives my king some protection. So that's the one I went ahead and played. Black now develops a queen, which is pretty early on move 3, clearly threatening the pawn here on b2. This again is that is a very common square for the queen to jump onto at some point in the game. So what I did here was decided to meet the queen. Now what we've got here is like a standoff, because if black's queen takes my queen, I would recapture with a2, and that then gives my rook on a1 a semi-open file that could later be attacked. And the same goes the other way around. It's kind of symmetrical position. And I don't actually want to take black's queen. I would be quite happy if black took my queen. So instead, black has declined that, came up with another little tactic. And this seems to be what black is trying to do in this game. It's like just these little pokes here and there, but there's nothing with much bite to it. So clearly, black has broken one of the general opening rules, which is try not to move your pieces too many times. So he's moved his queen twice already in the first 4 moves. Clearly the tactic here is c takes d4, at which point I cannot recapture because my pawn on c3 is pinned. It's an absolute pin. It would be illegal for me to move that pawn. Okay, so that's black's idea. Now what can I do about that, and what can I do in a way that perhaps allows me to develop pieces and maintain my structure and everything else? So I came up with knight to d2. Now obviously this would still allow black to take on d4, but then I can recapture c3 takes d4, and I've still got my 2 central pawns, and I'm not in check because the knight's now in the way. So the knight has broken the pin on the king. Black responds by playing d5, which seems like a perfectly reasonable move, gets some control over the centre square. c4, e4 is there. The pawn is protected by the knight on f6. And so far we seem kind of okay, but if you notice that I now have my knight and my bishop and my queen developed, black only has knight and queen developed, partly because he's used 2 moves to move the queen, 2 turns. So I play e3. Now what this is doing is it's adding a second defender to d4. It's also defending the bishop on f4, which was previously undefended, so that could have been a target. So this is what you need to be thinking about. It's like, one move doing multiple things. You want your pieces to be in attacking positions, but not particularly threatened, okay? Knight out to c6, perfectly reasonable, but is not very aggressive because it really doesn't have any squares to advance to. They're all covered. So I'm not too concerned about that. I play my knight out. Very often, if your opponent plays one of their knights out in the forwards position, it makes a lot of sense to counter that with your own knight, because that knight coming out is looking at these 2 central squares, and so is my knight. So this basically would prevent his knight from coming into e5, d4 anytime soon. Now black makes another slight error, or at least he's breaking the rule a little bit. He's moving one of his opening pieces twice again. Clearly he's attacking my bishop on f4. So my bishop could be taken on f4. If I move back to g3, it could also be taken. So I decide to move the bishop forwards to e5. I've been going through Simon Williams's latest London system training course, and this is a move that he recommended in there. So I remembered that from the videos that Simon had done. So the idea here is that if the knight on c6 captures the bishop on e5, then knight on f3 recaptures, and I've got my knight in an ideal square. really far forward. The only pawn that can threaten it is the f pawn, the forget about it pawn. This is a pawn that is, severely, extremely important for protecting the king, because it blocks off this diagonal here, So you really don't want to move that pawn unless you absolutely have to, or you've got a very good reason. So I would be very happy for his knight to take my bishop at this point and to improve the position of my knight. And then, of course, my knight on d2 can follow his brother to f3, and the two have then got each other's backs. Now, black again moves his queen yet another time. And I'm really not clear on the purpose of this move. The only reason I can see is that d5 is actually unprotected, and my queen could have taken it. But still, he's moved his queen now 3 times in the first 8 moves. And what this means is that he's even further behind on development now. I've got 4 pieces out in the board. He's only got the 2. So I move my bishop out to e2. Good developing move. So what I'm thinking here, and this is a difference, I think. You know how I said that at the beginning it felt like black was just kind of testing me with these little pokes. He's like, is a bit of a threat, is a bit of a threat. But each one I could just bash away, parry, defend very easily, okay? And improve my own position at the same time. So there's a difference here between, I think, the way that he's been playing so far in the game and the way that I've been playing so far in the game, which is that, so I move my bishop here to e2. And what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to layer up my threats and my ideas, my possibilities, my opportunities in the game. Okay, so my thought here, fairly straightforward. The knight on h5 is currently unprotected. So I'm thinking, if I move my bishop there, at some point in the game, I may get the opportunity to move my knight away from f3 and get a double attack, if that's possible. Now, for me, just on my next go to move my knight just for the sake of attacking his knight, that's a very obvious, straightforward attack, and it would not be hard for him to defend. He just moves his knight back to f6, for example, and I'd have to take it with my bishop. So, when you're thinking about your attacks, think about, look, how can I build up the pressure behind this before I launch the attack? Okay. Moves his bishop down to c4. I don't think that's a good move. Yes, it kind of constrains my light square bishop to a degree, but generally advancing that c pawn to c4 in the London system kind of setups it weakens black, if anything. Now at this point I decide I'm going to go for the attack, because I'm feeling like I've got the upper hand, I've got a lead in development, and I really want to start hassling black's king, So I think, right, if I exchange my knight now for these 2 central pawns on c and d, okay, this is black's only developed pawns, okay? So, a lot of the value that black has built up so far in this game is in those 2 pawns. Because what else has he done? The queen's messed about on that diagonal, and in 3 moves ended up going back home, right? He's got 2 knights out in the board, one of which is right on the edge on h5. And look at my knight. My knight there on d2 hasn't really got much of a future in this game. Okay, he can't move to e4, he can't move to f3 because the other knight's there. Can't take on c4, well, without being taken. So, and obviously can't move to b3 anytime soon because there's a pawn there. So I'm thinking, if we take there, black recaptures, I recapture with the queen. So I play that through in my mind and I try and visualize what the board's going to be like after that series of exchanges. And I'm thinking this looks like a much nicer situation for white. So the queen is now eyeing up that pawn there on f7. My knight is only 1 jump away from going to g5 and attacking f7. My bishop has got this nice outpost square there on e5. My king's ready to castle. Black can't castle. I'm feeling confident. And black, predictably, moves his queen again for no really good reason that I can see. Yes, there's now 2 attackers on the bishop on e5. He's got his knight on c6 and the queen, but that's got 2 defenders as well, and he's not going to take, knight takes, queen's not going to take and get taken by the pawn. So this, I don't get the point of this move at all. So I decide to push forward with my attack. If you've got the upper hand, you really want to get your boot on your opponent's throat and force them to react. Right? Don't give them time. If you can prevent it, don't give them time to execute their own plans. If you can keep them busy running away from your plans. So I actually had a think about this. Okay, so 28 seconds on this one, because it might seem obvious that I'm walking into a tactical trap here with pawn to f6. Pawn to f6, it's doubly defended, triply defended actually by the knight as well, and it's attacking the bishop on e5 and the knight on g5. So it's surely going to win a piece, right? Well, not necessarily, because if I can respond with a check, then I might have the opportunity to break the fork and not lose either of my pieces. So black actually thought for 2 minutes over this move and then still went ahead with f6, knowing that I have knight f7 or queen f7. So I play queen f7, which is going to force black's king to move, thereby losing castling rights. That pawn move has also, severely weakened the king, and of course now, I've now got 2 pieces looking at that knight on h5. Okay, so I'm now thinking this is the time to attack. This is the time to go for the kill. Do not let up. Make my opponent pay for the mistakes that he's made so far in the game. So king has to move. He's not really got that many options. Oh, he's got 2. He could move to d8 or he could move to d7. Neither is fantastic. He moves to d7, and now I want to bring another piece into the attack. Yes, at this point I could have moved my queen there to e6, but I don't want to get in a game of cat and mouse. Yes, the knight is there for the taking, but at this point in the game you have to attack. If I'd have gone ahead and taken the knight, then his pawn on f6 would have taken one of my minor pieces as well. So I haven't really won out of that. So what can I do? Bring the bishop in to g4 with check. King is forced to move again, and now can you see what I can do? I want to nullify this attack from the pawn on f6 against 2 of my pieces, so I can now bring my knight in to e6 and defend, and with check, moving it away from that vicious pawn. So the king now obviously cannot move to e8. It's only actually got 1 legal move because my bishop is now guarding this diagonal as well. But of course there's one other option available to him, which is to capture with a bishop. But this is all good. Queen just recaptures, and now still my bishop is on pre. It's being attacked by the f6 pawn, but still black can't capture it because I've got the risk of queen to d7 mate. So black has to do something about that threat. Okay. So what he decides to do is capture the bishop, and this knight, protected by the f6 pawn, is thereby covering the d7 square. So for now, he's slightly safe. I capture with the pawn. I've got ideas now. The king is now on a completely open file. So now I can swing my rook a to d1 with check if I want to, and then threaten queen to d7 checkmate again. In fact, after pawn takes, that is still the threat. So black needs another way to defend that d7 square. Moves his queen over to b5. I go ahead with the check. You can see at every opportunity I'm trying to bring all my pieces into the attack because I want a checkmate. King doesn't have many options, moves to e8 there. So now I think it's time to capture with the bishop because it comes with check. Black plays g6, which, yes, breaks the attack. In fact, it would have been, I think that's the only move, the only legal move on the board, because he can't move the king anywhere. So then I move my bishop back. Now, there are a few places I could have moved my bishop back to. I could have gone to f3 or g4, but e2 comes with an attack on the queen. Okay, so again, I am forcing that, forcing my opponent to react to what I'm doing. So he's had no time at all in this game even to think about his own ideas. So I guess what I'm kind of hoping is that queens are going to come down and capture b2, because that's quite safe. I can castle at any time, and I've got a really dominant attack going on. Black does go for this. He only took 6 seconds over that move. And this is a nice little thought. So I thought, okay, yes, I've got queen d7 if I want it, but if I do queen d7, then he's got king f7, and he's kind of running away from there. So then I thought, well, how about this? I've got this kind of slightly isolated pawn here on e5. If I take f6, e7 can't recapture, and I've got the threat then of pushing the pawn to f7, which would be checkmate, because the whole d file is patrolled by this rook down on d1. So I go ahead and take the pawn. Black throws in a check, and this is one of those checks that it really doesn't have any purpose or any bite whatsoever. So all I need to do is move my king along to f1. I need to check that the rook here on d2 is not unprotected, but the bishop's got its back there, so that's all right. And the queen now comes in and grabs the pawn, which he could have done. Oh yeah, so he's taken a pawn there, and that's opened up that. Okay. And at this point, I think rather than exchanging queens, which would actually improve his pawn structure, because this pawn here on e7 would then rejoin the g and h pawns. So I decide to go in for the check, again bringing the bishop in. The king is now shuffling away in the corner. I'm thinking that I've got the upper hand. Now, material is completely equal at this point in the game. We've both got 2 rooks, we've both got 1 bishop, although opposite coloured, and we've both got 5 pawns. But I've got, look at these 4 pawns around my king, okay, and I've got 1 single over here. Whereas black has got 2 pawns near the king, 1 completely isolated, and 2 over this side. So generally, as you're looking towards an endgame, you want your king near the majority of your pawns, because those pawns are going to defend the king or protect the king from attacks and reduce your opponent's options, but also the king can protect the pawns as well, because the pawns actually become more and more useful towards the end of the game. So I think about this. There's no obvious attack at this point, so I decide to keep the pressure on by capturing on b7. I'm threatening the rook on a8, and the rook now can't go to a8, b8 or c8 or d8, because my rook has got that file covered. So there's only one square that rook can go to. And just now look at black. He's cowering in the corner. He's not been able to connect his rooks so far in the game. So, you know, this rook now on e8 is a target. I've got my bishop on this nice diagonal. I'm thinking that bishop might drop back to b3 at some point, where it's defended by the a2 pawn and still defends the a2 pawn. I go ahead and just snatch up another pawn, because I figure, why not? My a pawn, that isolated pawn, now has got a pretty clear run to the line, to queen. Black plays queen to c6. Again, it seems a little bit loose to me. I've now got queen to d4 with check, possibly threatening to capture the rook on h8. So that's what I play. Black plays a pawn forwards, and now I'm thinking that, taking into account the pawn structures here, you know, I've got this nice solid set of 4 down there on that side of the board. Black's pawns, he's got 2 here and then an isolated pawn. So I'm thinking I am now ahead. I'm thinking with 20 minutes each left on the clock, if this goes to an ending now, I'm extremely confident of being able to secure the win. So I go in with queen to d7 check, with the idea of forcing an exchange of queens. And at that point, black actually resigned, because I think he came to the same conclusion. So what have we learned from this game? There's a reason why we have these basic rules. Try not to bring your queen out too early, and this is a really good reason to do it. Don't move your pieces multiple times in the opening. Black has fallen foul of that. Made a lot of queen moves in this game early on. And if you are in a winning position, keep your opponent on the ropes, keep those blows coming, keep your opponent constantly having to defend, so that they've got no opportunity to get into the game and start to execute their own ideas. So that's it. I hope you've enjoyed the game. I certainly enjoyed playing it, and I'll see you next time.